Okay. Well, I'm really excited, Alan, or Dr. Richard, that you agreed to do this interview with us today and just help all of us as families understand a little bit more about children's sleep and how to help them during this time. And to begin with, I know you and have known you a long time. I know you're wonderful both as a person and as a doctor, but you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself and so our families and others will understand why we knew you were a good person to turn to with these questions.
Absolutely. I'm from Louisiana. I get my college education in Louisiana and went to medical school in Shreveport, Louisiana, in the LSU system. Then I did a residency in psychiatry in New Hampshire, which is a 4-year residency. And after that, I did a 1-year fellowship training in sleep medicine. I completed that fellowship in 1998 and moved to Jackson, Mississippi, where I started working at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in the Sleep Disorder Center. Actually, I guess it's fair to share that Howard Rothward, your husband, was the physician who recruited me to come to Mississippi. And wow, that was 1998, and I'm still here. How many years is that? It's a lot.
It's a lot of years.
22 years.
How many is it?
22.
Wow, we go way back, and your career goes way back in Mississippi. Well, I was explaining to you right before we got started what Families as Allies is, and that some of the families from our organization were talking, and it's just been really challenging. Sometimes sleep can be challenging anyway with kids, and then when your child has a disability, it can be a little more challenging. And then here we are in the middle of this COVID, and everything's disrupted, and it's kind of crazy for all of us, and our children aren't sleeping too well. So if you had any thoughts just in general on helping children sleep, and then especially during this crisis, and if you can say a word or two about the little ones, because it sounded like some of them were having problems with their naps too.
Very good. Well, the first thing I worry about whenever the crisis started, well, not the first thing. First thing related to sleep that I worried about whenever the COVID crisis started and all the shelter at home orders came out and children stopped going to school was the sleep schedule. And a lot of times what happens in the case of children in problem sleeping is that they get off of a regular schedule. And anytime I see a child come into the sleep disorder center and the parents tell me they're not sleeping well, I would automatically think that they probably have their sleep schedule has been changed, or they're not sticking to a good sleep schedule. So probably the best advice I could give any parent for helping their kid sleep well is to try to maintain a very regular sleep schedule. And by regular, I mean trying to stick to the same bedtime and the same wake up time every day. I fear that a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this myself, a lot of times parents look forward to the time when their child is sleeping because they get a little bit of a break. Therefore, it's easy to allow them to sleep later in the day because you have less demands upon you when they're sleeping. But unfortunately, when children and adults are allowed to sleep late into the day and even during the day, that frequently disrupts their nighttime sleep, and it makes it harder for them to go to bed. So it might seem counterintuitive, but my best recommendation to help kids stay on a regular sleep schedule and sleep well at night is to make sure that they wake up the same time every day. That's what's important. I could go on and say that there are certain things that you can do to facilitate the process of sleep. It's always important to remember that it's easiest to sleep when you're in a dark, quiet room with very few things to stimulate your attention. So things like video games, cell phones, iPads, all the devices make it more difficult to go to sleep. Music and loud noise makes it more difficult to go to sleep. So whenever you're ready for your child to go to bed, it's a good idea to try to minimize all those stimulations. And probably everybody's aware of that. But if you aren't doing that, that would be a good thing to start doing. So minimizing lights, bright lights and sounds when it's bedtime, and making sure you stick to a regular wake up time is crucial. I like to remind people that you really can't make yourself go to sleep. There is no muscle or voluntary mechanism for making yourself fall asleep. You have to create an environment in which sleep will come to you, and making that environment quiet and comfortable and non-stimulating is how you facilitate that process of sleep coming to you. Another important thing to remember is that humans really aren't designed to sleep much more than 8 hours a night, or more than 8 hours a night. So if you're trying to get your children to sleep 12 hours a day, I would tell you to give up on that, because that's probably not going to work. In fact, I would limit time in bed to about 8 hours. If people spend more than 8 hours in bed, and these are even the younger children, so I'd say age 5 up to the early adolescence, which would be like 12 or 13, those kids aren't going to sleep more than 8 hours a night, typically. So if you're putting them in bed at 9 p.m. and expecting them to sleep until 9 a.m., you're going to be frustrated. That's too much time in bed. That's 12 hours. Most people sleep from about 10 p.m. until about 6 a.m. That would be 8 hours. You can shift that time on the clock if you want to and stay up an hour later to 11 p.m. and then wake up at 7 a.m. And that's all right to do. But try to limit yourself to 8 hours in bed. And the most important thing to keeping that schedule regular is the wake up time. Make sure you wake up the same time every day.
That, oh, I'm sorry. That's really helpful because, as and I guess I should know this since, as you alluded to, I'm married to a sleep specialist.
Right.
I think as a mom, and thinking back on our son growing up, there is that thing. It's really easy to think, yes, I need to get them in bed at a regular time because you want that. You want that for them, and then you want that time in the evening. But if they keep sleeping in the morning, it is like a little gift. So it's very easy to just let that happen and not realize that it's got to be regular or scheduled on that end too.
Absolutely. And I'm as guilty as anybody of letting that happen.
Because we all like those little moments. And then you said that makes sense, children 5 and above. What about and if I cut you off from saying something else, please feel free to go back to that. But what about the really little ones, like say a 3-year-old who is maybe struggling at night and their parents do some of the things you're talking about, but then the time during the day and we're in the middle of this crisis and they're, the time they'd normally go to sleep and take their nap, they're just totally wired. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I would say, again, that schedule is very important, and I would try to employ the same principles. So younger children, so 3 and below, need more sleep, but still you can't get them to, they only need so much sleep, and once they've reached their fill, you can't get them to sleep anymore. So they're a little bit of a more difficult group to deal with, but the things that I recommend when they're not sleeping well at night is, if they're not sleeping well at night, or they're not sleeping during their nap time, is to say maybe they don't need the nap. So I talked about sleep, there not being any voluntary mechanism of making yourself fall asleep, and all you can do is let sleep come. But one way that you can do another thing you can do to facilitate the onset of sleep is to stay awake for a long period of time. So most people recognize that the longer you stay awake, the sleepier you get. And that's a pretty reliable phenomenon. So even for little children, so if they're having trouble sleeping at night and they're taking a daytime nap, that might be one of the things that's complicating the nighttime sleep. I guess. So I know that children do sometimes get grumpy in the afternoons. There's a biological reason that can occur. There's a dip in our circadian cycle right in the mid-afternoon that causes some sleepiness and probably irritability in kids. So there might be a price to pay for keeping a kid awake during the day to have them sleep at night, and that price might be irritability. Unfortunately, I don't know a way of making that go away. I guess one could make the case that if you really wanted them to sleep during the day, maybe you could reduce the amount of time in bed at night so that they're a little more sleepy during the day. But I don't know that I would make that trade-off. I think probably a full night of sleep is preferable to having the daytime nap. Does that make sense?
That does. And I have no idea if this is happening with any of the families who are talking about this, but it also makes me wonder, just all of us being home with our kids, if it's making us aware of a lot of things that maybe we haven't had the chance to know before. So, and I have no idea, but a child may have been struggling with not needing to sleep as much as other people were trying to get that child to sleep, but the parent hadn't had a chance to observe that until this happened. So, I don't know, but you just made me think about that.
Yeah.
Well, can you think of any other tips or suggestions or ideas for us? I mean, you've given some great ones, so if there aren't any more, that's fine, but I just wanted to give you that chance.
Sometimes people think about medicines, and I'm resistant to using medicines to help children go to sleep, so I would stay away from that. You can get things over the counter, and some people will use melatonin. I'd just like to point out that melatonin is not a terribly effective hypnotic medication, so it's not something that makes you feel very sleepy unless you take it at high doses, and I don't recommend doing that for children. So as a rule, I would try to stay away from medicines and alcohol. Sometimes people will use that, but I would stay away from that. I like the idea of a regular wake-up time. I like the idea of a sleep environment that is inducive to sleep. It facilitates the process of getting to sleep, and by that I mean quiet, warm, comfortable. Regular schedule is important. Remembering that, unfortunately, we're only going to sleep so many hours a day. To ask somebody to sleep more than that time is asking them to do something that they're not biologically capable of doing. And to remember that one of the ways you help induce sleepiness is by keeping somebody awake long enough for them to get sleepy. So you can use that to your advantage. Short of that, I can't think of anything else good.
So go ahead.
Warm milk is not a bad hypnotic medication and completely very natural. Warm milk is a good idea, and a routine around bedtime. So once you establish the times that you want to sleep, develop a routine around that so that 30 minutes before the bedtime, you can start preparing for it. So some people like to do their nighttime bathing routine and brushing teeth. I found that sitting down and reading a story, if you can get your kids to sit down and listen to a story while you read in a nice, calm, kind of monotone voice, really facilitates the process of them going to sleep. And sometimes even the reader helps the reader get to sleep. So I find that very healthy. So a routine around bedtime, about 30 minutes before the time you want to go to sleep, start the process of getting into bed. And do the same thing every night. The body will learn those cues and learn that it's about time to go to sleep. I think that's all I've got.
Oh, okay. Well, this has been incredibly helpful, and you made me remember some things that I knew, and then brought up some things I hadn't thought about before. So I'm sure most of the families of our organization will have that same response. And we are so grateful to you for taking this time and appreciate it very much.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure, and I enjoyed it.